I've been expecting you. Alright. I'm no evil mastermind, and this is no bald cat. This is actually an ACX 3.0 cooler from a GTX 1080 for the win. If you're wondering why there's not a graphics card attached to this cooler, it is because the graphics card is in a custom loop, so it has a water block attached to it. I, like many of you, have very nice coolers from very nice graphics cards sitting around in boxes, essentially mothballed, collecting dust, waiting for the day they're needed, either perhaps for an RMA if the card starts behaving, in a wonky manner, or so that way we could restore the card to its original configuration to sell it, for an upgrade down the road. In the past, those of us who are into liquid cooling have had limited options, all of which are wasteful in one aspect or another. One option, of course, would be to get a reference-based card. The downside there is you're getting the reference-based PCB, so you're not going to have the best power delivery, you might not have the best components, and you're still paying for a cooler that you're never going to use. And let's not forget, as of recently, at least with the GTX 10 series, you did have to pay the Founders Edition premium for that reference PCB. And yeah, I know. There are the AIB versions that are reference design but not considered Founders Edition that have the blower styro coolers, but you're still getting a reference-based PCB, which isn't optimal, and you're still paying for a cooler, even though it's a cheap one, you're still paying for a cooler that you're going to have to take off, creating work for you, and that you're never going to use, and that you have to store, and that you have to put back on if you ever need to RMA the card or sell the card. The other option, of course, is to pay a little bit more money to get a AIB version of the card, so that way you get the better power delivery, the better components, and the nicer PCB. But there you're paying extra money for a very, very nice cooler. Nothing wrong with these coolers, but a very nice cooler that you're never going to use because you intend on putting it into a system with a custom loop. And, I know there are cards there like the Seahawk edition that come with water blocks on them, but if you're into custom liquid cooling, you want everything exactly how you want it. That's why we build our own systems instead of buying them from these boutiques. You want it exactly how you want it. You want to do it yourself. You want to pick every single component that meets your taste and your criteria exactly how it is. So I keep asking myself, why are these AIBs not selling cards that are literally just the PCB? Obviously not in place of their whole lines, but an addition that comes just as the PCB. In fact, an AIB could even have two versions that come like this. A reference-based card that's just a reference-based PCB, no cooler whatsoever. That would be nice and cheap, or, considering, because you're not paying for a cooler you're not going to use. It's going to save you time. It's going to offer a wide variety of block support because it is still the reference-based PCB. And they could also offer a beefed-up version that comes with, extra power phases, nicer power delivery, nicer components. And once again, you're going to get all those bells and whistles that you would normally have to buy a nicer card with a nicer cooler for, but you're not paying for a cooler that you're not going to use, and you don't have to take it off, and you don't have to store it, and you don't have to put it back on if you intend to sell it, or if you need to RMA it. In fact, this even opens up new avenues for us, where we could add bells and whistles onto the PCB, specially geared for liquid cooling. Like something I think would be really neat is imagine, like a For the Win class card with the extra power phases and everything like that, no cooler, and the PCB having a couple of fan headers on there, perhaps, supporting, 1 amp's worth of fans. That would be really cool. I don't like having to use software to control fans. For example, with this loop, I have all my fans connected directly to the motherboard. And the reason why I do that is because I like using the BIOS to control the fan profiles. Downside there is they're all going off the CPU temperature because the motherboard does not know the GPU temperature. It's not an issue for me because I have a 360 and a 280, so the fan's all running at their idle 30 or 35%, I forgot what I have them at. That still keeps the GPU under 50 degrees regardless of the circumstance. And if you're gaming, the CPU is going to get under a little load, so the fans are going to ramp up anyway. But I think it would be really nice if I could have a couple of fans going off of a header on the GPU, where they are bound to the GPU temperature, not the CPU temperature. Especially, imagine the possibilities there if you have a dual loop. You might have 360 on your CPU, going to motherboard headers bound to CPU temperature, and another 360 going to your GPU, with the fans going to the headers on the graphics card bound to GPU temperature. And you're probably saying, oh, but you would still need software to do that. Not really. Think about it. Those of you who have used AIO coolers, for example, I was recently using a Corsair H115. You could load up the Corsair software, specify the RGB color, the pump speed, and the fan curve. Then there would be an option there to basically store that into the device's firmware. Then after that, you could uninstall the software. You could even remove the USB header from the cooler, and it would still remember that RGB color, that pump speed, and that fan curve, because the firmware would remember it. Think of it, even with graphics cards, with this ACX 3.0 cooler, you could put this back on the card, put it into a system, excuse me, I have acid, put it back into the system, use Precision XOC to set the RGB the way you want them, to set the fan curve the way you want them, and then after that you could uninstall Precision X and it's going to remember the RGB color and it's going to remember the fan curve. It was the same thing with the MSI card I had, the same thing with the Gigabyte card I had. In fact, since the whole RGB craze has begun, I can't think of a graphics card that I've had where I've actually needed to keep the software running for the graphics card to remember the RGB settings that I put in it. Point being is firmware can be programmed to remember settings without reflashing a BIOS. So if you were to sell one of these cards that had 2 or 3 4-pin PWM headers on the PCB right here where you could quickly route it into a grommet on the motherboard tray, you would be able to use the manufacturer, the board partner's software to program in your fan curve, and if you didn't want the application running in the background, you could not have it running in the background because you could store those settings in the firmware if they allow you to. You wouldn't even need to have the application installed. You could install it, program it, and then uninstall it. I don't like having to rely on software to control my fan curves. And I don't like having to wait for Windows to load for my fans to work right. I don't have to worry about an application not working correctly for my fans to work right. I don't have to worry about it if I boot off a USB stick to Linux or something for my fans not to work right. I like using firmware to control things. Think about it with overclocking. How many of you actually use software to control your overclocks, even though there's plenty of it to do it, and pretty much all the motherboards come with their own software version for the overclocking? Of course not. 99% of us prefer to do the overclock from the BIOS for that reason. The same thing with fan profiles. So you could sell a graphics card that doesn't come with a cooler, comes with a few extra features on the PCB specifically geared towards liquid cooling, like fan headers that could be programmed by software that does not require the software to be running to stick to the preset curve. And I think everybody would win. I think any AIB that made a card like that would be selling them to a lot, if not all, the people that are into custom loops. Us as consumers, we would win because we're not going to be paying for parts that we're not going to use, and we're going to get some extra features that we definitely will use. So I think it's a good thing for everyone involved. Regardless of your thoughts on the channel or the style of the video or anything like that, if you like this idea and you think it's a good idea, like the video. If we get enough likes where it actually holds enough weight, I'll pass this along to the AIBs just that way they could see that the community is interested in this, and maybe they'll knock it around in their meetings and perhaps do something with it. If you think it's a stupid idea and a bad idea, dislike the video. But we'll see. Thank you for your time, and hopefully, maybe, we can get this for the next generation of graphics cards.